The stallion slammed into the fence so hard the post cracked, and the 3 ranch hands, who'd been inching toward him, scattered like leaves in a hard wind. One of them clutching his arm, his face white with pain. Nobody moved toward the horse. Nobody except her. Lillian Caldwell walked straight toward 1,000 pounds of fury. Her hands open at her sides, her voice low and even, saying something nobody else could hear, and the stallion, the one that had just broken a grown man's arm, went still. Jackson Cole watched from the gate and felt the ground shift under his boots. He had come for the horse. He had no idea what he had actually found. If this story reaches something inside, you subscribe to this channel. Stay with us until the very end and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Jackson Cole rode into Caldwell Ranch on a Thursday afternoon with one goal and no complications. Find the horse, assess the horse, fix the horse, collect the money. Leave, that was the whole plan. Clean, simple, the way he liked things. He had made the same plan at 23 different ranches over 11 years. And it had worked every single time. He arrived as a stranger. He left as a stranger. And in between those 2 moments, he did the work that nobody else could do. And he kept every feeling that tried to get involved locked behind a door inside him that he had stopped checking on years ago. He was good at it. Better than good, he was the best. And the best do not get surprised. He got surprised. It happened within the 4 minutes of arriving at Caldwell Ranch, before he had even dismounted properly. Before Henry Caldwell had finished his handshake, before anyone had said more than 20 words to him. Jackson swung down from copper, and his boots hit the dirt, and Henry said, "Thank God you're here, Cole. We've been..." And then a sound came from the far end of the property that stopped everything. Not a scream, not a crash, a silence. The specific kind of silence that drops over a working ranch when something has gone suddenly and badly wrong. Then one of the ranch hands came running around the corner of the barn, a big man. Someone who did not look like the running type, and his face was the color of old ash, and he was holding his right arm against his body at an angle that made Jackson's stomach tighten before he'd even processed why. "Broke the fence," the man said, breathing hard. "He broke the fence and I was too close and he..." "Where's Lillian?" Henry said. His voice cut straight through everything, no panic. Just urgency, the voice of a man who had already done his panicking in private. "She's all ready." The ranch hand stopped. He looked toward the far end of the property. Something in his face changed. She went toward him. Henry moved. Jackson moved with him. They came around the corner of the barn, and Jackson saw it all in one moment. The way you sometimes see things, when the moment is moving too fast for your mind to organize it into sequence. The corral fence was broken, one post cracked halfway down. 2 rails knocked free and lying in the dirt. The black stallion was inside the corral still. But barely, pacing the broken section with his head high and his nostrils flaring and his whole body carrying the electric charge of an animal that had passed through panic and landed somewhere beyond it. The 3 ranch hands were standing 15 feet back. Not one of them was moving toward the horse. And Lillian Caldwell was walking directly toward him. No rope, no whip, no tool of any kind in her hands. Just walking. Steady and slow, her hands loose at her sides. Her shoulders low, her body angled slightly, not head-on. Not a challenge, just a presence. A calm one. Moving toward a situation that had just sent 3 experienced men backward. Lillian. Henry said her name, the way you say something, when you know the saying of it won't change anything. It didn't change anything. She kept walking. The stallion saw her. His pacing stopped. His head was still high, still reading everything. Still deciding whether the world was safe or dangerous. And then Lillian said something. Low and even, barely loud enough to be words. Jackson couldn't make out the content. He could only make out the pattern of it. Steady, unhurried. Like a hand placed carefully on something fragile. The stallion's ears moved, forward both of them, toward her. It took 4 minutes. Jackson counted, Because counting was the thing his mind did when it needed to stay useful instead of simply standing there with his mouth open. 4 minutes of Lillian doing almost nothing, walking, stopping, waiting, saying those low, unhearable words, and by the end of it she was 6 feet from the stallion, and the stallion had stopped pacing, and his head had come down 3 inches from where it had been. Not calm, not fixed, not safe, not by any definition Jackson would have used, but listening. She turned around then, and for the first time she seemed to notice that Jackson was standing there. She looked at him, the way people look at someone they were not expecting, assessing. Direct, nothing wasted in it. "Is this the man you hired?" she said to her father. "Yes," Henry said. "This is Jackson Cole." Lillian looked at Jackson for another second. "Don't come any closer to this fence today," she said. "He's too unsettled. Tomorrow morning early. We start then." Then she turned back to the horse. Jackson stood in the dirt of Caldwell Ranch and watched her. And the door inside him, the one he had stopped checking on, made a noise he had not heard it make in a very long time. He ignored it. He was good at ignoring things. He was not, it turned out, quite good enough. Henry put a hand briefly on Jackson's shoulder and said, quietly, "Now you understand what I'm working with." Jackson wasn't entirely sure which one Henry meant, the horse or his daughter. He was not in that moment entirely sure which one he was thinking about, either. 3 hours earlier, Jackson had been reading Henry Caldwell's letter for the second time in the back room of a boarding house in Laramie. And the letter had told him everything he needed to know. He thought it had, anyway. Henry wrote plainly. Jackson had appreciated that. No flattery, no exaggeration of what the situation was or wasn't. A stallion, black, 4 years old, named Thunder Ridge when the name still meant something good. One of the finest horses in the Wyoming Territory 18 months ago. The kind of animal that made other horse breeders look twice and then look away because looking too long felt like coveting. Then the transport accident. A rope snapping in the dark. The crate breaking open, the horse going down hard on his left shoulder, on a riverboat deck, while the water moved beneath him, and the noise was everywhere, and every human being around him was shouting rather than helping. 20 minutes before anyone reached him. 20 minutes of being pinned and terrified and completely alone. And the horse that came back from that trip was not the horse that had left. Henry had tried patience. He'd tried experienced handlers. He'd tried the 3 men currently employed at the ranch, all of whom were capable, and none of whom had been able to get within 10 feet of the stallion without triggering a response that had already put 2 of them in the doctor's office and was apparently working on a third. Henry had heard about Jackson Cole through the network that ranch owners and horse breeders maintain the way other people maintain friendships, carefully, and with an awareness that you might need them someday. Jackson had a reputation, not for magic, for something harder to explain than magic, for seeing what the horse was actually doing and responding to that, instead of responding to what you wanted the horse to do. Henry offered good money. Jackson accepted by letter the same afternoon. And at the very bottom of Henry's letter, that last line, the one Jackson had read 3 times before folding the paper away. "I should mention, my daughter has been spending time near the horse for several months. She means well. She is not a professional. But I did not want you to be caught off guard." He had not been caught off guard by the information. He had been caught completely off guard by the reality. There was a difference, he was discovering, between knowing a thing and standing in front of it. Henry Caldwell was a big man going tired. That was how Jackson read him over supper that first evening, a man who had been strong for a long time and was feeling the cost of it. His handshake was still solid and his voice was still steady. But his eyes had the look of a man who had lain awake too many nights, running numbers that never added up. "Tell me about the accident," Jackson said. He hadn't touched the food yet. He wanted to understand the foundation before he built anything on top of it. Henry told him. All of it. The transport, the riverboat, the snap of the rope. He told it factually, without drama. The way men tell stories about disasters they feel responsible for, even when they weren't there. Were you there? Jackson asked. No, Henry said. I sent 2 men with him. Good men. They did everything right. The rope was faulty. The equipment company admitted it after the fact. For all the good that did. He looked at his plate. I keep thinking about those 20 minutes. What it must have been for him. In the dark. In the water noise. Not understanding why nobody was helping. Jackson said nothing. He was thinking about it too. And after, Henry continued. When he came back, I thought it would pass. I thought horses recovered. Some do. I've seen it. He shook his head. But he was different. Not just afraid. Changed. Like something broke in his thinking about people. It did, Jackson said. That's exactly what happened. He made a decision, not a thinking decision. A deeper one than that. He decided that people were the source of pain. That when things get bad, people don't help, they make it worse. And he built everything around that decision. Henry looked at him. Can you undo it? I can give him evidence that contradicts it, Jackson said. Enough evidence, consistently, over enough time, yes. He can change his mind, but it takes time, real time. Not weeks. Henry's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Harlan Wade comes in 6 weeks. I know, Jackson said. We'll work with what we have. A pause. Then Henry said, Lillian thinks he can be ready. Jackson looked up from his plate. She told you that? She tells me a great deal of things, Henry said. In the tone of a man who has heard more than he's acted on. She has journals. Notes about the horse going back months. He stopped. Restarted. She's been more involved with this than I perhaps allowed myself to fully see. Jackson had a thought. He did not say it. But he had it clearly. You didn't allow yourself to see it because seeing it would have required you to do something about it. I'd like to read those journals, Jackson said instead. You'd have to ask her. I will. Henry picked up his fork. Put it down again. Looked at Jackson with the direct, uncomfortable honesty of a man who has decided to say something he's been not saying for too long. She's 26. She's my daughter, and she's the cleverest person on this ranch, and I don't know what to do with that. I never knew what to do with that. Her mother would have known. He picked the fork up again. Her mother died when Lillian was 14. Jackson said. I'm sorry. Yes, Henry said. So am I. They ate in silence after that. And the silence was not uncomfortable, which told Jackson something about Henry Caldwell that the words hadn't. He was a man who could sit in a hard truth without trying to escape it. Jackson respected that. He didn't meet it often. She was at the fence before dawn. Jackson woke at 5 and lay in the dark of the bunkhouse for 2 minutes, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling into its morning. And then he got up and dressed and walked out into the gray pre-light, and she was already there. Not doing anything visible. Just standing. Her back straight. Her arms resting on the top rail, her face turned toward the corral. The horse was moving in the far corner, the anxious pacing Henry had mentioned. The morning ritual of an animal working through something before the day started. Jackson walked up beside her, slowly enough that she heard him coming, and stood a careful distance away. You're here early, she said. Without turning. You're here earlier. I'm always here at this time. He wakes up unsettled. The first hour is when he decides how the day is going to feel. She paused. Most people don't know that. They come out mid-morning when he's already committed to being afraid. And then they can't understand why their approach isn't working. 4 months of mornings, Jackson said. Yes. That's a serious thing to give. She turned to look at him then, really look. The first time she'd done it with full attention rather than the quick assessment from the day before. Her eyes were dark and direct and contained something that was not quite wariness and not quite curiosity, but something balanced between the two. Someone needed to, she said. Those 3 words landed differently than they should have. Jackson had been told he had a way with horses because he could see what they actually needed rather than what people wanted them to be. He had never been told that in words, exactly, but it was in those words. Someone needed to. Not someone was paid to. Not someone was assigned to. Someone needed to, so she did, because the alternative was that nobody did. I want to read your journals, he said. She was quiet for a moment. Why? Because you've spent 4 months learning things about this horse that I don't know. And I'd rather start where you are than start from scratch and waste time we don't have. Something shifted in her face. Subtle, but real, like a small door opening somewhere. She reached into the large coat she was wearing and produced the journal. It was thick and worn, the cover creased from handling, and she held it out to him without ceremony. He took it carefully and opened to the first page. September 14th, 1884. First morning, after Thunder Ridge returned from transport. Wind from the northwest, temperature near freezing. He paced for 3 hours and 40 minutes before he stopped moving. Would not approach the feed, placed at center of corral. Ate only after all humans left the area and the gate was closed. Note, he watched the gate for 11 minutes after it closed, before moving toward feed. He was confirming we were gone. Jackson read that entry twice. Then he turned the pages slowly. A month of entries. 2 months. Each one precise and patient and building on the one before it. Adding detail, refining observations, testing theories against results, and correcting them when the results said something different. Day 31. Tried approaching with feed in hand rather than placing it at distance. He retreated to far corner and did not eat for 4 hours. Conclusion. Direct approach with food reads as pressure. Not offering. He needs to come to the food. He needs to believe the choice is his. Day 47. Left my coat on the fence post nearest to him overnight. He avoided the post for 3 days. On the 4th day, he approached it. On the 5th day, he pressed his nose against the coat for several seconds. He was not frightened of my scent. He was deciding about it. Day 71, discovery. He responds to rhythm, not melody, specifically the rhythmic pattern of repeated sound. When I sing near him, the pattern of the verses calms him in a way that random talking does not. Hypothesis. Predictable patterns signal safety to him because the accident was defined entirely by things being unpredictable. He is not afraid of people. He is afraid of not knowing what people will do. Jackson stopped at that entry. Read it 3 times. He is not afraid of people. He is afraid of not knowing what people will do. This is the insight that changes everything, Jackson said quietly. He wasn't performing admiration. He was simply reporting what he read. The way you report a fact. This entry, day 71, I know, she said. It took me 71 days to see it clearly enough to write it down. Most professionals would have been gone by day 15. He looked up at her. Did you study horses formally? School? Any kind of training? She smiled. A small one. A little dry. I read every book my father had. I wrote to 3 different horse breeders in the East, asking about behavioral approaches, and 2 of them didn't write back, and 1 wrote back to suggest I ask my husband. She paused. I'm not married, I gathered. I taught myself, she said. By watching, by writing down what I saw, by being wrong and correcting it. She looked back at the horse. It's not complicated. It just requires paying attention for long enough that the patterns start to appear. Jackson looked back at the journal. It's not complicated, he said. Most people who watch animals watch them the way they watch weather. They notice what's happening without asking why. You've been asking why, consistently, for months. That's not nothing. She was quiet for a moment. The horse had slowed his pacing in the corral, down to a walk now. Still restless, but moving through it rather than being consumed by it. He's settling, she said. You notice that too. I notice everything, she said. And it wasn't boastful, just matter of fact. It's the only advantage I have in a situation where everyone around me has decided I'm not the right person for the work. That landed flat and honest in the morning air between them. And Jackson did not pretend it hadn't. Your father, he said. My father loves me, she said carefully. He also does not believe that what I do here constitutes anything that should be taken seriously. He has made that clear in a number of ways over the past 8 months. She paused. He believes the solution to this ranch's problems is a man named James Whitmore. Jackson kept his eyes on the journal. Is James Whitmore good with horses? James Whitmore, she said, has never spent a single morning standing at a fence in the cold because an animal needed someone to be there. The silence after that was the kind that means something. Then he's not the solution to anything, Jackson said. He felt her look at him. He didn't look up from the journal. No, she said after a moment. He's not. The horse reached the near side of the corral. Stopped. Looked at them. The ears came forward, both of them. The same way they'd come forward the day before. Reading. Deciding. Don't move, Lillian said softly. I'm not moving, Jackson said. They stood completely still, and the stallion looked at them both. And the morning sat around them, quiet and cold, and full of something that none of them had a name for yet. On the 5th day, Henry called Jackson into the office. Jackson had been expecting it. He'd seen it in Henry's posture over supper the previous 2 nights, the posture of a man building up to something, organizing his arguments in advance. Sit down, Henry said. Jackson sat. Real progress. Slow progress. Which in this situation is the same thing as good progress. Henry nodded. Lillian is useful to you. It was not quite a question. Lillian is essential, Jackson said. Henry's expression did something complicated. She has other obligations. Jackson waited. James Whitmore's family has been patient, Henry said. But patience has a limit. His father has asked me twice in the past month when we can expect a formal conversation about arrangements. Henry looked at the map on the wall rather than at Jackson. I cannot keep putting them off indefinitely. With respect, Jackson said. If Lillian is removed from the process before the inspection, the chances of Thunder Ridge being ready in time drop significantly. I cannot guarantee the result without her. Henry's jaw tightened. Why? Because the horse trusts her, not me her. Specifically, she has built something with that animal over 4 months that I cannot replicate in 6 weeks, no matter what I do. I can build on it. I cannot replace it. He paused. You hired me to save this ranch. I'm telling you how. Henry was quiet for a long time. Then he said, and after the sale? When the horse is gone? What does she do with all of this then? It was the same question he'd asked before. And Jackson had thought about it since. He had an answer now. But it wasn't one he was ready to say out loud yet. That, he said, is a question worth asking her. Henry looked at him. Is it? Yes, Jackson said. It is. Another silence. The kind that sits between a question that's been asked and the answer that won't be given today. 6 weeks, Henry said finally. I'll give you 6 weeks. After that. He didn't finish it. He didn't have to. Jackson stood up. 6 weeks will be enough. He said it with more certainty than he had. But he had learned, over 11 years of difficult horses and difficult situations, that certainty, even borrowed certainty, had a way of making itself true. He walked back out of the office and into the open air of the ranch. And the mountains were there in the west, solid and permanent. And somewhere on the other side of the main barn Lillian was at the fence, and the horse was learning, day by day and hour by hour, that the world could contain safe things. Jackson understood that lesson better than he had ever admitted. He had just never expected to learn it again. He had thought he was done with learning it. He had thought wrong, and for the first time in 11 years, he found that the thought of being wrong did not feel like something to outrun. It felt strangely and dangerously, and against everything he had decided about his own life. Like something to walk toward. He was not ready for that. He walked toward it anyway. Jackson did not sleep well that night. And he had stopped pretending. The reason was the unfamiliar bed. He lay in the bunkhouse, staring at the dark ceiling, and running through everything he knew about the horse, about the ranch, about the 6 weeks ahead, and every time he got to the end of that list, his mind went back to the beginning and started over. Not because the list was complicated, because there was something at the edges of it that he couldn't quite see directly. The way you can't look straight at a dim star, only at the space beside it. He gave up on sleep at 4:30 and went to wash his face in the cold basin outside. And when he came around the side of the barn, with his hair still damp, he stopped. She was already at the fence, Not just at the fence. Inside the corral. Not near the gate inside. Standing 20 feet from the stallion in the dark of early morning. Completely alone, her back to the barn, her face toward the horse that 3 men had decided was too dangerous to approach without a rope in their hands. Jackson's chest went tight in a way that had nothing to do with professional concern. He moved forward and caught himself. Stopped. Because Thunder Ridge had noticed him the moment he came around the barn. And the horse's head came up sharply, and watched the way the stallion's body changed the tension moving through him like current through a wire, and then he watched Lillian's respond to it without turning around. She just talked. Low and continuous and rhythmic, the way she'd described in her journal, not the words but the pattern. The steady repetition of a cadence that said to the horse the same thing over and over. Nothing has changed. I am still here. The world is still the same as it was a moment ago. The tension moved back out of the stallion the same way it had come in. His head lowered 2 inches. His ears stayed forward. Pointed at Jackson now, but without the hard edge. Only then did Lillian turn around. "You came around the wrong side of the barn," she said quietly. She wasn't angry, just precise. He can hear footsteps from the east side before he can see the person. It gives him less time to process before the stimulus arrives. Come from the west in the future. He sees you first. Processes at distance, and by the time you're close, it's already familiar. Jackson took that in. "You put that in the journals." "Day 93, she said. "Come in slowly." He came in through the gate. She waited, watching the horse rather than him, and Jackson crossed the corral at the pace she'd taught him, not so slow it looked deliberate. Not so fast it looked like approach. Thunder Ridge watched him. The ears moved. The head stayed low. "He's different than yesterday," Jackson said. "He's always different in the morning," she said. "The afternoon version is more guarded. Morning he's still close to sleep. Less defended." She paused. "I think it's the only time he forgets a little." "What happened?" Jackson stood beside her, and they were both quiet, and the horse looked at them and didn't move away. "How did you get inside the corral?" Jackson asked. "Slowly," she said. "Over about 6 weeks. Your father knows you're doing this?" She gave him a sideways look that answered the question without using words. "Lillian." He kept his voice low, not for the horse's sake, but because the morning felt like something that would break if you hit it wrong. "If he comes in here when you're alone, and something goes wrong, then something goes wrong," she said. "That's been true every morning for 6 weeks. I assessed the risk. I decided it was worth it." She looked at him directly. "Don't tell me that's not your decision to make. I know it's not. I'm telling you so you understand where we are. Not so you can argue me out of it." He wanted to argue her out of it. He understood, very clearly, that it would accomplish nothing. "Fine," he said. "But from here on you're not in here without me." She considered that. It was a real consideration. He could see her actually weighing it. Not just waiting for him to finish talking. "Agreed," she said. "On the condition that you follow my lead. Inside this corral. My 4 months outrank your 11 years. "Agreed," he said. Thunder Ridge took 3 slow steps toward them. Stopped. Took 1 more. Neither of them moved. "He did that yesterday," Jackson said. "When we were at the fence. He's been doing it for 2 weeks," she said. "Each time a little closer. He's testing whether the ground between us is safe." "And is it?" "So far," she said quietly. "So far it is." Jackson stood in the cold morning air of that corral and felt the specific quality of the thing around them, not silence. Not calm, but something more active than both of those. Something being built. An understanding between 3 living things who had each, in their different ways, decided they were done being afraid of the same things they'd always been afraid of. Or at least 2 of them had decided that. The third was still working on it. He wasn't entirely sure which of the 3 he meant. That realization arrived without warning and left him nowhere to put it. So he filed it behind the door and turned his attention back to the horse and made himself focus on the work in front of him, because the work was real and manageable, and the other thing was neither of those. The horse took 1 more step, 5 feet away, then stopped and looked at Jackson with those dark, careful eyes that contained something. Jackson recognized the look of an animal that wants to trust and is terrified of wanting to trust. Because trust is the thing that got it hurt the last time. Easy, Jackson said. Not to the horse, to himself. He didn't realize he'd said it out loud until Lillian looked at him. I know, she said. And she said it gently enough that Jackson understood she wasn't talking about the horse, either. He looked straight ahead. The sun was beginning to come up behind them. And Thunder Ridge stood 5 feet away in the growing light. And nobody moved, and something that had no name kept building in the space between all of them. The day started. It started with that. Over the next 2 weeks, they built a routine so specific and consistent that it became its own kind of language. 5 in the morning, both of them at the fence. The approach. The waiting. The slow daily measurement of the distance the horse was willing to close. Lillian tracked every session in her journal, the same precision, the same patience, the same refusal to round numbers up or pretend the setbacks weren't setbacks. Because there were setbacks. On the 19th day, one of the ranch hands dropped a bucket on the far side of the barn, a sound. A crash, nothing significant, and Thunder Ridge exploded. Not at them. Not toward the fence. He ran the perimeter of the corral 4 times at a full, panicked gallop, and when he finally slowed, he stood at the far corner and would not come off it for the rest of the morning. Lillian wrote it down, every detail. Then she closed the journal and said, without looking at Jackson, we go back 3 days. The setback was external, Jackson said. It wasn't anything we did. It doesn't matter what caused it, she said. His trust is at a certain level. Today it dropped. We go back to where it was and rebuild from there. If we push forward as though it didn't happen, we're lying to him. And he'll know. Jackson looked at her. You said that like you've made the mistake before. Day 52, she said. I pushed when I should have waited. He didn't come near the fence for 9 days after that. She picked up the journal and tucked it back into her coat. I learned. They went back 3 days. They rebuilt. On the 23rd day, Thunder Ridge ate from Jackson's hand for the first time. It happened at the end of a session, when the light was already going, and they should have been heading inside. Jackson had a piece of carrot. Lillian had been leaving carrots at the fence post as part of a gradual process she'd mapped out 3 weeks in advance, and he was going to set it down when the stallion moved toward him directly. Not toward the fence, toward him. 3 feet, then 2 feet. Then close enough that Jackson could feel the heat of him. Then the great dark head dropped, and the carrot disappeared from his hand. And Thunder Ridge raised his head and looked at Jackson and chewed. Jackson did not move for 15 seconds. When he finally turned to look at Lillian, she had both hands pressed over her mouth, not making a sound. But her eyes were doing something that they hadn't done in all the weeks he'd watched her, something unguarded and sudden and real. That's the first time, she said through her hands. That's the first time he's done that with anyone except me. I know, Jackson said. She dropped her hands. She looked at him, and there was nothing careful in it. Nothing measured, nothing held back at the right professional distance. Just the plain, honest expression of someone who had spent months working towards something and was seeing it arrive. We're going to make it, she said. He should have said something practical. He should have said something about the timeline, or the buyer, or the remaining weeks. He should have said something that kept the conversation in the appropriate territory of work and horses, and the job he'd been paid to do. Yeah, he said instead, we are. She smiled, and Jackson Cole, who had made a careful practice of not being moved by things, felt moved in a way he had no category for. He went back to the bunkhouse. He opened his notebook. He wrote nothing. He sat with the empty page for a long time, which was not something he had ever done, and then he put the notebook away and told himself he was tired. He was not tired. He knew what he was. He had been successfully not knowing it for 11 years. It turned out 11 years was the limit. The next morning, everything changed. Not with the horse, with the ranch. Jackson came around the west side of the barn, at 5:20 the right side. Lillian's rule, he had not come around the east side once, since the first morning, and Lillian was not at the fence. He stopped. He had never arrived before her. In 23 days. Not once. She had always been there first. He waited 5 minutes. 10. He walked to the fence and stood where they usually stood, and the horse came to the near side of the corral and looked at him with an expression that Jackson could only describe as puzzled. Then the horse looked toward the house, then at Jackson, then at the house again. "I know," Jackson said. "I don't know where she is either." He waited 20 minutes and then walked to the house and knocked on the door. The housekeeper, a small, serious woman named Mrs. Briggs, opened it. Her face told him something was wrong before she said a word. "Is Lillian all right?" he asked. "She's inside, Mrs. Briggs said carefully. "Mr. Caldwell has a visitor." Jackson heard voices from the back of the house. Henry's voice, a voice he didn't recognize, and then Lillian's clear and controlled and carrying something underneath the control that he recognized because he had heard it from her before. The specific tone she used when she was being reasonable about something that was making her furious. He did not go in. He went back to the fence and he worked with the horse alone, which was harder and slower and less effective than working with Lillian. And he thought about what Mrs. Briggs's face had looked like and what Henry's visitor probably meant. Lillian came out an hour and a half later. She walked to the fence with her hands in her pockets and her jaw set in a way he hadn't seen before. The horse noticed immediately. His head came up and his pacing increased, and Lillian stopped outside the corral gate, pressed her forehead, briefly, against the wood of the post, and breathed. Jackson waited. After a moment she said, "James Whitmore was here." "In person," Jackson said. "In person," she said, "with his father, to discuss the formal arrangement." She lifted her head from the post. Her voice was level. Her eyes were not. "My father told him he needed more time." 2 weeks. "That's something," Jackson said. "He didn't do it because he changed his mind," she said. "He did it because Whitmore Sr. suggested that it would be more appropriate to wait until after the Thunder Ridge sale so the financial circumstances were clearer before any marriage settlements were negotiated." She paused on that word. And the pause said everything. "I am a circumstance in their financial negotiation." Jackson said nothing, because anything he said would either be inadequate or would cross a line he had been careful not to cross. He held both of those options and stayed quiet. "I'm not going to marry him," Lillian said. "I want to be clear about that. Whatever my father decides, whatever the Whitmores expect, that is not going to happen. I need you to know that I'm not operating under the assumption that it will." "Okay," Jackson said. She looked at him. "That's all? Okay? You don't need my permission," he said. "And you don't need my argument. You know what you're doing." He paused. "What you need is for Thunder Ridge to be ready in time so your father has his money and the Whitmores have no leverage." Something moved in her face. It was quick but real, the look of someone who expected to fight and found something different instead. "Yes," she said. "That's exactly what I need." "Then let's get back to work," he said. She looked at the horse, who had stopped pacing, and was watching her from 20 feet away with those patient, attentive eyes. She looked at Jackson. Then she unlatched the gate and walked into the corral, and the horse moved toward her and some of the tension in her shoulders went away. Not all of it, but enough. Jackson watched her put her hand on the stallion's neck, and watched the horse lean into it, and understood something about what that horse represented to her that had nothing to do with money or breeding, or the value of fine horseflesh. He was the one thing in her life that she had built from nothing, that had responded to her alone, that had become what it was because of what she gave it, without anyone's permission, without anyone's help. He was proof that she was exactly who she knew herself to be. Jackson understood that. He understood it in a way that reached past the professional and into something older and more essential. Because he had his own version of it, 11 years of horses that nobody else could reach. 11 years of proof that he was still capable of something. Still useful for something, even after Denver, even after everything he had lost, and everything he had decided to stop wanting. The horse was the same thing for both of them. He had just never seen it that clearly before. He went into the corral. He took his position. They worked without talking for 2 full hours. And the work was the best they had done yet, because something had shifted in Lillian, and she was running on something purer and fiercer than patience now. And the horse responded to it, the way horses respond to clarity. At the end of the session, when they were walking back toward the barn, Lillian said quietly, "Thank you for not saying something useless this morning." "What would have been useless?" he asked. "I'm sure it will work out," she said. "Your father means well. Give it time." She glanced at him. People say those things when they don't know what else to say, and they want the conversation to be over. "You didn't do that." "No," he said. "Why not?" He thought about that. "Because I don't think things always work out," he said honestly. "Sometimes they don't. And I don't think useless comfort does anything except teach people not to trust you when you say something real." She stopped walking. He stopped too. "Who hurt you?" she asked. It was so direct that for a second he had no response. Nobody had ever asked him that, not like that. Not looking at him, the way she was looking at him, not with pity, not with prurient curiosity, just with the same clear-eyed observation she turned on everything. "That's a personal question," he said. "Yes," she said. "It is." She didn't apologize for it. He looked at the mountains. He looked back at her. He made a decision that surprised him even as he was making it. "Denver," he said. 11 years ago. I had a wife and a daughter. Fever went through the area. 3 weeks." He stopped. "That's all I'm going to say about it." She held his gaze. "That's enough," she said quietly. "I understand." "Do you?" "My mother died when I was 14, she said. "I understand what it does to a person, what it makes them decide about the world." She paused. "What they decide they won't risk again." The morning sat around them, and neither of them spoke, and it was one of the more honest silences Jackson had ever stood inside of. Then Lillian said, "For what it's worth, I think you've been doing it wrong." He blinked. "Doing what wrong?" "Running," she said simply. "You think keeping moving keeps you safe. But you're just carrying it with you at speed. It doesn't stay behind." She looked at him with that level. Unguarded directness. "You can't outride it. You can only put it down somewhere." Jackson stared at her. "I'm 26 years old," she said, "and I know that because I tried to do the same thing. Just staying very busy, very useful, very involved with things that needed me, so I didn't have to think about the things I'd lost." She looked at the barn. "It doesn't work." "And what does work?" he asked. And he genuinely didn't know what the answer was going to be. She thought about it. "Deciding to stay somewhere long enough to find out," she said. "I think that's the start of it. The rest you figure out after." She went into the barn. Jackson stood where he was and felt the morning around him and did not move for a while. The door inside him, the one he had stopped checking, was making noise again. Louder now. He still didn't open it. But he put his hand on it. That was new. On day 28, something happened that neither of them had planned for, and both of them, in different ways, had been moving toward without knowing it. They had been working with Thunder Ridge for 3 hours, and the horse was having his best day, yet relaxed, responsive, willing to be led in a slow circle inside the corral while both of them walked beside him. No resistance, no panic at the edges, just a horse moving through the world with something that was not quite trust yet but was close enough to trust that the difference was mostly technical. They stopped in the center of the corral, and the horse stopped between them. And then he did something. He lowered his head and pressed it gently against Lillian's chest. The way horses sometimes do with people they have decided are safe. Not asking for anything, not performing, just placing himself in contact with her in the specific way that means, in horse terms, "You are part of my world now, and I am not afraid." Lillian put both arms around the great dark head and pressed her cheek against his jaw and closed her eyes. Jackson watched. He knew, professionally, that this was a significant moment. He knew what it meant for the inspection, for the timeline, for the probability that they were going to make this work. He filed all of that information correctly, and then he noticed, because he had been noticing things about her for 4 weeks and had gotten very accurate at it, that she was crying, not dramatically, almost silently. Just the specific stillness of someone letting something go that they have been holding for a very long time. He looked away, gave her the privacy of it. Thunder Ridge stood completely still and let her hold him. And Jackson understood that the horse knew, not the way people know things, not with language or reasoning, but with the deep, uncomplicated certainty of an animal that is someone is safe and is offering itself as safety in return. After a while, Lillian straightened up. She wiped her face with the back of her hand in one practical motion, the same way she did everything directly without fuss. She looked at Jackson. He looked back. "We're going to be ready in time," she said. "Yes," he said. "He's going to be everything they need him to be for that inspection." "Yes," he said again. She nodded once, firmly the way she made decisions. Then she said, "Will you tell me something?" "Depends on what it is." "Why did you agree to my terms?" she said. "The first day. I told you inside the corral my 4 months outrank your 11 years. And you said agreed." "Why?" She studied him. "Most men in your position would have humored me at best. Let me think I had a say, and then done things their own way." Jackson looked at her steadily. "Because you were right," he said. "And I knew it." He paused. "I've spent 11 years being the person in the room who sees what everyone else is missing. The first morning I read that journal, day 71. Specifically, I understood that you were doing the same thing. And I'm not." He stopped. Restarted. "I have a lot of faults. Ignoring someone who can see what I can't see isn't one of them." She was quiet for a moment. "That might be the most respectful thing anyone has ever said to me," she said, "which is a fairly damning indictment of everyone around me. But I'll take it." He almost smiled. He stopped it. He was not yet ready to stop stopping it. Almost. It was the 30th day, exactly 30 days since Jackson had ridden into Caldwell Ranch, when Henry called them both into the office together. That was new. He had called Jackson in alone before. He had, apparently, conversations with Lillian in other places at other times. But together was new, and the three of them stood in the practical office, with the map and the photograph, and Jackson felt the temperature of the room before anyone had said a word. Henry had a piece of paper in his hand. "I had a letter from Harlan Wade this morning," Henry said. "He's moved the inspection." Lillian went absolutely still. "He's moving it forward," Henry said. 2 weeks. He has other business in the territory, and he wants to combine the trips. The inspection is now in 4 weeks instead of 6. The room was quiet. Jackson did the calculation immediately. 30 days of work. 30 days of progress. 30 days of rebuilding a trust that had been broken by something that nobody had deserved. And now 4 weeks instead of 6. 28 days instead of 42. He thought about where Thunder Ridge was, where he needed to be. The gap between those two things. "Can it be done?" Henry asked. He was looking at Jackson, not Lillian. Jackson. Jackson looked at Lillian. She was looking at the floor, doing her own calculation. He could see her doing it, the precise, rapid accounting of someone who knew every variable intimately. Her eyes moved the way they moved when she was reading the horse's behavior and running it against her weeks of observation. Then she looked up. "It can be done," she said, "but we have to change the approach. We've been going slow because slow is sustainable. Now we need to be faster without rushing." She looked at Jackson. "Which means more sessions per day. Not longer, more frequent. 3 times a day instead of once. 2 of us every session." "Can the horse handle that kind of intensity?" Henry asked. "I know this horse," Lillian said. "Yes. But only if we do it right. If either of us pushes when we should wait or moves fast when we should be still, we lose ground we can't get back." She looked at her father. "I need your ranch hands to stay away from the East Corral completely. No passing through, no repairs, no noise. The horse needs that space to be ours." Henry looked at her. Something in his expression shifted, something small and significant. The look of a man who is seeing something clearly for possibly the first time. "All right," he said. "And I need your word," she said, "that whatever conversations you're having with the Whitmores, they wait. They don't happen on this property for 4 weeks. I cannot be managing that and managing this at the same time." Henry was quiet for a moment that stretched. "Lillian," he said. "Papa," she said, and her voice changed on that word, not softer, not more pleading, but more direct, more real. The voice she used when she stopped performing patience and just told the truth. "I can save this ranch. I am saving this ranch. I need you to let me do it." The clock on the wall ticked. Henry looked at his daughter. He looked at her, the way Jackson had noticed. He sometimes looked at her when she wasn't watching him, the complicated look of a man who loves someone and keeps failing them and knows it and can't quite figure out how to stop. 4 weeks, Henry said. "You have my word." Lillian nodded. She turned to Jackson. "We start the afternoon session today. 3 o'clock. She left the office. Jackson started to follow her. And then Henry said his name. He stopped, turned back. Henry was still looking at the door she'd gone through. "She was right," Henry said. Not to Jackson exactly. More to the room. About the horse. About the journals. About all of it. She was right. And I told her she wasn't, and she kept going anyway. He paused. "What kind of person does that?" "The kind," Jackson said, "that you raised." Henry looked at him. Jackson left the office. Outside, Lillian was already walking toward the corral. Jackson fell into step beside her, and she glanced at him, and he glanced back, and they didn't say anything. Because there was nothing that needed saying right now that the silence wasn't saying better. 4 weeks. They had 4 weeks and a horse that was learning to trust. And something between the two of them that had no name yet, but was gathering the way weather gathers slowly, and then all at once. And the kind of thing that changes everything it touches when it finally arrives. Jackson kept walking. He did not think about what happened at the end of 4 weeks. He thought about the 3 o'clock session and the distance the horse needed to cover and the work in front of them. He was very good at thinking only about the work. He was getting worse at it by the day. The 3 sessions a day schedule changed everything. Not just for the horse, for all of them. The first week under the new timeline moved at a pace that left Jackson tired, in a way he hadn't been in years, not the tired of physical work, which he was used to and could manage, but the tired of sustained concentration. Every session with Thunder Ridge required the kind of attention that didn't allow for half-presence. You were either fully there or you were a liability. The horse knew the difference in ways that no amount of professional skill could fake. And the cost of a bad session wasn't just a bad session, it was 3 days of rebuilding what one careless hour had taken. Lillian understood this at a cellular level. Jackson had been learning it intellectually for years. Being in that corral with her 3 times a day accelerated something in his understanding that he hadn't expected, not about horses, but about the kind of patience that wasn't passive. The kind that was actually the most demanding work you could do. The kind that required you to bring everything you had and then hold it perfectly still. By the end of the first week, Thunder Ridge was leading on a loose rope. Not perfectly, not without moments of tension, but leading, choosing to move with them rather than against them, which was the difference between a horse that had been broken and a horse that had decided to cooperate. Lillian recorded everything in her journal at the end of each day. Jackson started reading the entries over her shoulder without asking permission, and she stopped, not offering. They developed a shorthand, a raised hand that meant wait, a slight shift of weight that meant approach, a specific stillness that meant the horse is deciding right now. Don't breathe wrong, and the shorthand became fluent before either of them acknowledged it was happening. On the 8th day of the new schedule, they were in the corral for the midday sessions when Lillian reached back without looking and held out her hand. Palm up. She wanted the lead rope he was holding. He put it in her hand. She moved forward 3 steps, spoke to the horse, and led him in a full circle before returning to where Jackson stood. She gave the rope back. He's more relaxed on your left than your right, she said. The shoulder injury, it healed, but there's still sensitivity. Approach from the left when you can. You put that in the journals? Day 112. She looked at him sideways. Did you read that far? Not yet. Read it tonight, she said. There's more in there about secondary injuries. He compensates. You can see it in the way he carries his weight. If anyone pushes him from the right during the inspection, he'll react. Jackson processed that. Then we make sure Harlan Wade's evaluator approaches from the left. We make sure everyone approaches from the left, she said. And we need to think about what the inspection looks like. Wade is going to expect a demonstration. A horse standing calmly in a corral isn't the same as a horse that can be evaluated for function and value. What are they going to want to see? Jackson had been thinking about this for days. Movement, gaits, response to handling. They'll want to see him led. Probably stood up for conformation. Maybe a short ride, or at least a rider mounted. Lillian's expression didn't change, but something in it became very focused. Mounted, she said. Probably. That's the part we haven't touched. I know. She was quiet for a moment, looking at the horse who was standing 10 feet away and watching them with the calm attentiveness that had become his baseline over the past weeks. He trusts the ground with us, she said slowly. He trusts being close. Being led, being touched, she paused. Mounted is different. Mounted is where it broke. In the transport, he was restrained from above. The ropes came down on him from above. A rider is weight from above. Jackson had known this. He had been circling it. We have 2.5 weeks. I know what we have, she said quietly. I'm not panicking. I'm calculating. She turned to look at the horse. We start introducing the idea of weight from above today. Not a rider. Not yet. We work up from there. How? My way, she said. And she almost smiled when she said it. Almost your way, he agreed. She started that afternoon. She climbed to the top rail of the fence and sat there. Where Thunder Ridge could see her, could see that she was higher than him. Above him, present in the vertical dimension that he associated with danger, and she just sat there. Still, rhythmic, in her talking, for the whole session. The horse paced. He didn't bolt. He paced and he came near and he went away and he came near again. And by the end of the session, he had stood still 15 feet from the fence while she sat above him. And that was where they stopped. Good? Jackson asked when she climbed down. Better than I hoped, she said. He came near. That's the whole point. He came near instead of running. They ran the evening session the same way. By the end of it, Thunder Ridge had come to within 8 feet of the fence while she sat on the top rail. Jackson watched the horse find the edges of his courage and push them incrementally, and he felt something turn over in his chest that had to do only partly with the horse. He had been watching someone push the edges of their courage for 4 weeks. He had been watching it and admiring it and keeping it at the exact careful distance that 11 years of practice had made automatic. That distance was getting harder to maintain. He noticed that the way you notice a sound you've been hearing for a while, finally identifying itself. Clear, specific. Impossible to unknow once you'd named it. He did not name it. He went back to the bunkhouse and read to the end of the journal instead, and found in the final entries a thoroughness and a precision and a loneliness so deeply embedded in the work that you could only see it if you were looking for it. She never wrote about herself directly. Every entry was about the horse. But in the margins, sometimes, there were small notes that had nothing to do with observation, a question. Half-formed, crossed out. A sentence started and stopped. Once on a page in late January, just 3 words with no context. Someone should know. He stared at those 3 words for a long time. Someone should know. Know what, he thought. Know what you're doing out here alone every morning. Know that you've built something extraordinary that everyone around you has been too busy to see. Know that you're more capable than anyone in this territory is willing to say out loud. He closed the journal. He did not sleep easily. The following morning, when he arrived at the fence, he said to her before they started, "Someone should know. Just that. Nothing else. She turned to look at him. She understood immediately. There was no confusion in her face. Just the quick clarity of someone who recognized her own words. "You read all of it," she said. "Yes." She turned back to the corral. A long moment. "I wrote that on a night when my father had told me for the third time that week that I should redirect my energy toward more appropriate endeavors." Her voice was even. "I'd just figured out the rhythm thing that day. I'd been trying to tell him, and he'd walked away in the middle of the sentence." She paused. "It felt like if I didn't write it somewhere, it would just disappear. Like it had never happened." "It didn't disappear," Jackson said. "No," she said. "You're the first person who read it." He looked at her profile. The particular set of her jaw that meant she was containing something. "I know," he said. "That's what I'm saying. Someone knows now." She didn't respond for a moment. When she did, her voice was slightly different from usual, not different in a way she would have let most people hear. But he was attuned to her now in a way that 4 weeks of 3 sessions a day does to 2 people who are paying very close attention. "Thank you," she said. Just that, clean and real, and without apology. Thunder Ridge appeared at the near side of the corral. He looked at both of them, then pressed his nose against the fence rail between them. Not asking for anything, just present, placing himself in the space between them the way he had done before, and would keep doing, because he had decided they were a unit now, and units were safe. The 3 of them stood like that in the early morning. Jackson thought, "This is the kind of moment you can't plan for." He thought, "This is the kind of moment that changes the shape of everything that comes after it." He didn't say either of those things. He put his hand on the fence rail. An inch from the horse's nose, and the horse didn't move. And Lillian's hand was on the other side of the rail. And the morning was very still. That was day 37. On day 39, James Whitmore came back. Not with his father this time. Alone. He rode in at mid-morning on a good horse. Jackson noticed the horse first, as he always did, a solid bay quarter horse, well cared for, and he tied it at the post near the house and went inside. And Jackson knew the way from Mrs. Briggs's shoulders looked when she opened the door that this visit hadn't been announced. Lillian was in the corral. She didn't see him arrive. Jackson kept working. He ran the midday secession without her. Whitmore's timing, intentional or not, had pulled her inside during the one time of day they couldn't afford to lose, and Thunder Ridge felt the missing piece immediately. He was cooperative, but less settled. He kept looking toward the house. "I know," Jackson said to the horse. "I know, the session was shorter than usual." Jackson ended it early, rather than push the horse into something that felt thin and careful, without Lillian's presence anchoring it. He led Thunder Ridge back to the center of the corral and stood with him and waited. Lillian came out of the house 40 minutes later. Jackson could tell from 30 yards away that the conversation had not gone well. Not from her face. She controlled her face efficiently and automatically. A skill born from years of needing to. From her walk. She walked the way she walked when she was burning something off. Precise, purposeful, slightly faster than usual. She came to the corral gate, and Jackson let her in, and she went straight to the horse. No preamble. She put both hands on Thunder Ridge's neck and stood there, and the horse curved his head back toward her the way he'd learned to do. Jackson waited by the gate. After a few minutes, she said, without turning, he came to set a date for the arrangement, for what he is apparently now comfortable calling our engagement. The word came out, flat and controlled, and with something underneath it that was not controlled at all. He was very pleasant about it. He said he understands I have reservations, but that he's confident time will address them. She paused. He said he expects I'll come to appreciate the security. Jackson said nothing. He's not a bad man, she said. That's the part that makes it worse. He genuinely believes he's offering me something good. He looked at me the whole time we talked and saw exactly what he expected to see and nothing else. And he was very kind about all of it, and I wanted to. She stopped. Started again, her voice lower. He doesn't see me. He sees a category of person that I happen to fit. And he's decided he wants that category, and I am the nearest available example. Her hands tightened on the horse's neck. "I am not a category." "No," Jackson said, "you're not." She turned around then. "What did he say? My father. Did he set the date?" "I don't know," Jackson said. "I wasn't inside." "But he didn't send Whitmore away," she said. "No." She looked at the house. Then she looked at the corral. The calculation happening in her face was visible and painful to watch, not because she was losing control of it, but because she was maintaining control of it so tightly that the effort showed. 19 days, she said, yes, if Thunder Ridge is ready. If Wade's evaluator declares him fit. If the sale goes through. She said each condition like a stone being placed carefully. Then my father has his money. Then the Whitmores have no argument left. Then I make my own choices. Yes, Jackson said. That's how it works. She looked at him steadily. You're very certain for a man who keeps telling me he doesn't promise things he can't guarantee. I'm certain about you, he said. And you've guaranteed this horse. Something happened in her eyes. He saw it and didn't look away and didn't qualify what he'd said and didn't fill the silence that came after it with anything careful. She nodded once. Evening session in 2 hours, she said. We're going back to the fence rail. I want to get closer today. She went to get the journal. Jackson stood in the corral with Thunder Ridge and the horse looked at him with that dark, patient gaze, and Jackson looked back and said quietly, I know, me too. The horse blinked. It was not encouragement. Exactly. But it was something. The next 12 days were the best and the hardest of the whole process. In exact proportion to each other, because the closer Thunder Ridge came to being ready, the more fragile the whole thing felt. Progress at this stage was the most delicate kind. Every gain was real, and every gain could be lost. It was the kind of work that required you to know the difference between the horse being ready and the horse performing readiness, and to never let yourself be fooled by the latter. Lillian knew the difference. Jackson trusted her knowing. By day 44, Thunder Ridge was accepting weight on his back. Not a rider, a rolled blanket first, then a heavier weight. Then Jackson's hands pressing down steadily on both sides of the spine while the horse stood and breathed and chose to stand. He didn't love it. He was never going to love the memory that weight from above carried. But he tolerated it because he trusted the people around him. And tolerance born from trust was sustainable in a way that tolerance born from fear never was. On day 45, Lillian climbed on. She didn't ask Jackson. She didn't consult the journal. She stood beside Thunder Ridge, with one hand on his neck and one hand on the fence rail, and she looked at the horse for a long moment. And then she stepped up and swung her leg over and sat on his back, and the whole world went quiet. Jackson stopped breathing. Thunder Ridge went rigid. Every muscle, the whole body locked in the specific freeze of an animal in a moment of maximum decision. Lillian did nothing. She sat, and she breathed, and she talked in that low rhythmic way, and she did absolutely nothing except be present on his back, in the most still and unthreatening way that a human being on a horse's back can be present. 10 seconds. 20, 30. Then Thunder Ridge took a breath. The kind Jackson had heard before long, deep, the exhale that meant release. The choosing to set something down, and then the horse took a step. Forward, voluntary. Not because he was led, not because he was cued. Because he decided to. Lillian exhaled too, and her exhale matched the horse's in the way that meant she had been holding herself still for so long that the release of it was physical and whole body. And she put one hand flat on his neck and said something to him that Jackson couldn't hear. He didn't try to hear it. It wasn't for him. He watched the woman who had spent months understanding something that everyone around her had decided wasn't worth understanding. And he watched the horse that had decided to trust again because she had given him enough mornings to learn it. And he understood that what he was looking at was one of the most real things he had ever seen. He was not prepared for how it affected him. He had genuinely thought. In the organized part of his mind that kept track of such things that he had processed what he felt about Lillian Caldwell into something manageable. Professional appreciation. Respect. Something that could be contained in those words. He had been wrong about that. He was watching her on that horse, and the door inside him, that had been making noise for weeks, was not just making noise anymore. It was open. He hadn't opened it. It had opened the way things open when you've been holding them shut so long that the holding itself eventually fails. Everything behind that door came through at once. Not violently. Not dramatically. Just completely. He sat down on the fence rail because he needed to sit down, and he put his hands on his knees, and he watched Lillian walk Thunder Ridge around that corral walk. Not ride. Just being present together in motion. And he thought, I have spent 11 years moving from ranch to ranch, and the reason I told myself was that I had work to do everywhere. Important work. Work that nobody else could do, and that was true. But it was also the story I told, instead of the real story. The real story was that he had been waiting to stop being afraid of staying. And he had met someone who had made him forget to be afraid. The session ended. Lillian slid down from the horse's back, and Thunder Ridge turned to look at her, and she laughed a real laugh. Sudden and full, and completely unguarded, and it was the first time he had heard her laugh like that in 45 days, and it landed in him like something that had been aimed. She turned around and saw his face. She went still. He hadn't hidden it quickly enough. He had been so inside the moment that he hadn't had the reflex working. And she saw what was in his expression before he could make it neutral. And she saw it completely. They looked at each other across the corral. Jackson made himself speak. He's going to be ready, he said. He's going to be exactly what Wade's evaluator needs to see. Yes, she said. Her voice was careful in a new way. 4 days, he said. 4 days, she agreed. Neither of them moved for a moment. Then the evening started coming in, and Thunder Ridge nudged Lillian's shoulder with his nose, demanding her attention back, and she turned to the horse, and Jackson looked at the darkening sky and breathed. 4 days. He needed 4 days to get through the inspection with his job intact and his intentions unspoken and his plan to ride out afterward still operational. He needed 4 days to hold the door shut long enough to finish what he came to do. He had known, on some level he'd refused to examine, that he wasn't going to manage it, but he held on. He held on because she had 19 days of work left, and she needed him to be the person she'd made an agreement with, the professional, the partner in the corral, the man who didn't bring complications into a situation that already had enough of them. 3 days before the inspection, Henry Caldwell did the thing Jackson had been watching him build toward. Jackson was coming back from the evening feed when he heard voices in Henry's office, not the office itself. The study beside it, where the door was slightly ajar. He heard Henry's voice and a voice on the other end of a letter being read aloud. And he heard the words that stopped him cold in the hallway. I have reconsidered the terms of the arrangement. Henry was reading, or reciting. His voice had the flat quality of someone repeating something they had memorized. In light of the uncertainty around the Thunder Ridge transaction, my family believes it is more prudent to finalize the agreement before the sale rather than contingent upon it. We ask for confirmation by the end of this week that the arrangement will proceed. Our terms remain as discussed. Silence. Then Henry said, to someone in the room, Mrs. Briggs, probably if the sale falls through, the Whitmores are the only option this ranch has. And if the sale doesn't fall through, Mrs. Briggs said. Another silence. I've given her 4 weeks, Henry said. I gave her my word. If she delivers, if that horse is ready in 3 days, I'll honor what I promised. A pause. But if she doesn't, I need to know there's a way forward. Jackson moved away from the door. He went to the bunkhouse and sat on the edge of the bed and thought very carefully about what he'd just heard. Not with anger, with the specific cold clarity that came to him in moments when the stakes got real and emotional responses were a luxury. Henry was hedging. Henry was a man who loved his daughter and was failing her in a way that was also, in its own complicated way, trying to protect her. He had made a promise in a moment of genuine intention and was now looking at what happened if the promise cost him everything. Jackson understood that. He didn't agree with it, but he understood it. And he understood something else. The inspection in 3 days was not just about a buyer and a horse and a sale price. It was about whether Lillian Caldwell got to be free. He was going to make sure that horse walked into that evaluation like everything he had ever been, and more. He went to find Lillian. She was in the barn, brushing Thunder Ridge down after the evening session. The horse stood relaxed under her hands, his eyes half closed. The specific piece of an animal that has had a good day and knows it. Jackson came to the stall door. She looked up at him and immediately knew something had changed in his expression. "What happened?" she said. He told her. Not everything, not Henry's exact words. Not the full weight of what he'd understood, but enough. The letter from Whitmore, the hedge, the contingency. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she set down the brush and stood very still for a moment. "He didn't say the arrangement was confirmed," she said. "No, he said if I don't deliver." Her voice was precise. "Which means he believes I'll deliver." She looked at Thunder Ridge. "He's been watching us. He's seen the progress. He believes in the inspection." A pause. "He's just not ready to believe in me as the reason for it." Jackson said nothing. "That's all right," she said, and she said it in the tone that meant it was not entirely all right, but she'd decided to let it be. "He'll see it in 3 days. He'll see it when Wade's evaluator opens that corral and Thunder Ridge walks out like the horse he always was. And he'll know, everyone will know how that happened." She picked the brush back up. Went back to work. Her hands were steady. "Lillian," Jackson said. "We're fine," she said. "Get some sleep. We need the morning session to be our best one yet." He stayed at the stall door. "I want to say something." She slowed, didn't stop. "All right. When this is done," he said, "I want to talk. About what comes next." She was quiet for a moment, her hands moving in the long, smooth strokes she used. Then she said, "What comes next for who?" "Both of us," he said. The brush stopped moving. She turned to look at him across the stall. Thunder Ridge shifted between them, the great dark body warm and present. And she looked at Jackson with those direct eyes that saw everything they looked at. And she said very quietly, "Okay, just that." Jackson nodded. He went back to the bunkhouse. He did not sleep for a long time. But it was not the same kind of not sleeping as before. Before he had been awake, because things were unsettled. Tonight he was awake, because something had settled, not resolved. Not finished, but settled in the way that a decision settles when you've finally made it all the way through. He had come to Caldwell Ranch for a horse. 3 days from now, the horse would be ready, and then he was going to find out whether he was ready for what came after. He lay in the dark and listened to the ranch sounds and thought about a woman who had spent 4 months at a fence alone in the cold because someone needed to, and about a horse that had decided the world could contain safe things, and about how sometimes the thing you come looking for leads you somewhere you had no map for, and no plan for, and no real choice about, because it's already happened before you knew it was happening. He had been running for 11 years. 3 days. He could feel the ground coming up to meet him. Part 4, Louis, Viet 4000, 204,500, Thu Lien Kate Lien Mike, Vakak Fun Chuk Chum Kochuent. Fa Hoi Twai, Dao Tang Mut Kochuent Lien Mike, He Gep Lai. Moi Fun Lien Mike, Voi Fun Chuk, Kum Zoithio Lai Kochuent a Do Fun Mui. Lien Kate Kak Fun Kwa Kochuent Mut Kaik Lien Mike. Suzum Kochuent Tip Zua Kak Fun. Duichi Chude. Trying Ngot Quang Dot Ngot. Kom Suzum Gaik Do Zong Huak Dio De Fu. Fong Kaik Ke Chuent Mi Huaki Zont Van Zor Kamsuk. Chentuk Vagun Gui, Kom Moth Akaing, Dup Chung Vau Hang Don Kamsuk Vatum Linyan Vat. Viet Fun 2 Dat Dim 1010 Vabosung Titto Ko Chuent Nan. Suer Loya, Hathio Noi to the Ba, Tung Do Kikting Kong Viet Lan Man. Kituk Fun, Kom Zoi Tio Fun Sao. Lu I Chaloi Chom Muk Tinyan Kom Nye Sang Muk Document. Moi 2-3 Foot, Kun Ka Mini Climax Vadat 10-15 Mini Climax Moi Fun. Ku 10-12 Foot Ko 1 Twist Learn Sosak. Danzen Mini Cliffhanger Mike Hun. Tung Ting Tut Nyen Cho Fan Ung Kwakak Nyenvat. Tam Nyip Dio Kik Ting. Tuk Te Vagun Gui. Moi 8-10 Foot Kun Ka Mak Zu Chun Kanzat. Lui komotakaing vachikan vitnoidzung va vit dungleng chatoy. Viet Lien Mike, Kongkazo, Gaikngang Ngun Kaikak Trang Part 4. The morning of the inspection arrived the way important mornings always do, without ceremony. Without warning, exactly like every other morning, except that it wasn't. Jackson was up at 4. He lay in the dark for exactly 3 minutes, running through everything in his mind the way he always did. And then he got up and dressed and went outside, and Lillian was already at the fence. Of course she was. She had been there every morning for 5 months. She was not going to stop on the one morning that mattered most. He walked to stand beside her, and they didn't speak for a while. Thunder Ridge was in the near corner of the corral. Not pacing. Standing, his head was low and his breathing was even, and he was watching them with the calm attention that had taken 48 days of 3 sessions daily to build from nothing. "How is he?" Jackson asked. "Good," she said. "He slept well. I checked him at 2. You were out here at 2 in the morning. I couldn't sleep," she said simply. "And I wanted to make sure he wasn't picking up on anything. Horses feel the tension before you show it. If I was anxious in the house, he was going to feel it somehow. So I came out." Jackson looked at her profile. She was tired. He could see it in the set of her jaw, in the slight shadow under her eyes, but she was not the kind of tired that would slow her down. She was the kind of tired that had been running on something deeper than sleep for months. "Harlan Wade arrives at 10, he said. "I know. His evaluator man named Curtis. Henry told me last night. Curtis has a reputation for being thorough. He'll want to see Gates handling response to strangers." "Strangers," she said. The word sat in the air between them. "Yes. Thunder Ridge has never interacted with a stranger," she said. "Not since the accident. Every person who's come near him in 5 months has either been me, or you, or someone he's seen enough times at a distance to categorize his background." She paused. "Curtis will be something new. I know. If Curtis approaches wrong—" "He won't," Jackson said. "I'm going to talk to him before he gets near the corral. I'll tell him what he needs to know." She turned to look at him. "Will he listen?" Jackson thought about this honestly. Evaluators with reputations don't always like being told how to do their job. So he might not listen. He might not listen, Jackson said. "Which is why this morning's session is the most important one we've done. We need Thunder Ridge so settled, so grounded in himself, that even a stranger approaching wrong doesn't trigger the old response." He looked at the horse. "We need him to trust himself, not just us." Lillian was quiet for a moment. "That's a different thing than what we've been building." "Yes," he said. "It's the next level of it." She thought about that. Then she unlatched the gate. "Then we start now," she said. "We have 6 hours." They went to work. The morning session was different from every session that had come before it, not in technique, but in intention. They had been building trust for 7 weeks. Now they were building confidence. They moved around the horse in less predictable patterns than usual. They varied their distances. Jackson made sounds he wouldn't normally make a dropped tool. A sharp word called across the corral, a sudden movement that stopped immediately, and each time, Lillian was there, steady and rhythmic and real, her presence the anchor point the horse returned to after each small disturbance. Thunder Ridge tested each disruption. His head came up. His ears went hard forward. His body tensed with the speed of something old and not entirely gone. And then he looked at Lillian, and came back. Every time. By the 8th repetition, the head came up less high. By the 12th, the tension moved through him, faster, arriving, and leaving in seconds rather than minutes. By the end of the 2-hour session, Jackson could drop a feed bucket 10 feet away, and the horse would look, assess, determine it was not a threat, and go back to what he was doing. It was not perfection. It was not the horse Thunder Ridge had been before the accident. It was something better than that. It was a horse that had been broken and had chosen to be whole again. When they came out of the corral, Lillian was breathing hard in the way that had nothing to do with physical exertion and everything to do with concentrated effort, released all at once. She stood with her hands on the fence rail and her head down for a moment. "That was it," she said. That was everything we had. It was enough, Jackson said. She looked up at him. You don't know that yet. No, he agreed. But I know what I just watched. And what I just watched is enough. She searched his face. He let her search it. Whatever she found, there seemed to settle something. Because she straightened up and tucked the journal under her arm and said, I'm going to get ready. Curtis needs to see this done right, Lillian, he said. She stopped. Whatever happens today, he said. Whatever Curtis says. Whatever Wade decides. Whatever your father does after. You saved that horse. That happened. Nobody takes that from you. She held his gaze for a long moment. I know, she said. But I'd like the sale to confirm it. If it's all the same to you. She almost smiled. He almost smiled back. She went to the house. Harlan Wade arrived at 10 minutes past 10, which told Jackson something about him before he'd said a word. A man who arrived 10 minutes late to a business meeting was a man who wanted you to feel the waiting. Wade was in his mid-50s, prosperous in the visible way of men who had been prosperous long enough to stop trying to prove it. And he shook Henry's hand with the easy confidence of someone who expected the day to go his way. Curtis was different. Curtis was a small, spare man of indeterminate age who arrived behind Wade, saying nothing and observing everything. He had the particular quality of stillness that Jackson associated with people who had learned that watching was more useful than talking. He carried nothing except a small notebook and a pair of good leather gloves. Jackson introduced himself before Henry could. Jackson Cole, he said, extending his hand to Curtis first. I've been working with the stallion for the past 7 weeks. Curtis shook his hand and said, I know your name. Heard it from Delbert Marsh in Cheyenne. Said you brought back a paint mare everyone else had given up on. 2 years ago, Jackson said. Different situation. Same principle. What principle? Curtis asked. His eyes were sharp and direct and professional. That the horse isn't the problem, Jackson said. The horse is responding to a problem. Find the real problem, and the horse finds its own way back. Curtis studied him for a moment. And what was the real problem here? Fear that no one would be consistent, Jackson said. Fear that the world was unpredictable, and pain was the only reliable thing in it. He paused. We gave him consistency. We gave him enough mornings in a row that predictable became real again. Curtis was quiet for a second. Then you said we. Myself and Miss Caldwell, Jackson said. This is her work as much as mine. More in some ways. She started 7 weeks before I arrived. Something moved in Curtis's expression. Not surprise exactly. The adjustment of a man recalibrating. Henry said you were the specialist, Curtis said. Henry was wrong about who the specialist was, Jackson said evenly. He knows that now. Curtis looked toward the house. Then at Jackson again. I'll want to see how the horse responds to each of you separately, he said. And to me. That's fair, Jackson said. I need to ask you to approach him on his left side. He has residual sensitivity on the right from the shoulder injury. A right side approach from someone he doesn't know would trigger a stress response that doesn't reflect where he actually is. Curtis looked at him for a moment. Jackson did not soften the request or qualify it. Left side, Curtis said. All right. They walked to the corral together. Wade came too. With Henry beside him, and the small procession moved across the ranch yard with the specific weight of a moment that has been waited for from multiple directions. Lillian was at the fence when they arrived. She had changed into clean clothes, but her hair was the same as always practical. Back, no concession to the occasion. She looked at the approaching group, and her expression was calm and professional, and Jackson could see, because he had learned to see it, the quality of the effort that calm was costing her. Wade looked at her and looked at Henry and said, This is your daughter? Yes, Henry said. Lillian. Wade nodded in the brief way of a man acknowledging something he doesn't consider especially relevant. Curtis, beside Jackson, said nothing. He was watching Thunder Ridge. The stallion had noticed the group. His ears were forward. His head was up. He was reading, assessing the number of people, the arrangement of them, the quality of their movement. Jackson watched the horse, doing his calculation, and held his breath. Thunder Ridge looked at Lillian, settled. Not completely. Not the way he settled in a session alone with them. But he settled enough. The head came down 2 inches. The ears angled, rather than rigidly forward. The pacing that had started stopped. He responded to her, Curtis said quietly, beside Jackson. He always does, Jackson said. She's his anchor. Curtis wrote something in his notebook. Can we go in? Wade asked. He was impatient in the way of men who had decided how the day was going to go. Yes, Lillian said before Henry could answer. But I go in first. Wade looked at her. Miss Caldwell, I think. This horse has had 7 weeks of careful reconstruction, she said. And her voice was pleasant and absolutely immovable. The approach sequence matters. I go in first, Jackson follows. And then Mr. Curtis can enter from the left gate at whatever pace feels right to him. If that order changes, the evaluation will not show you what this horse actually is. She looked at him steadily. Do you want to see what this horse actually is? Wade blinked. Henry looked like a man who had been surprised by something he maybe should have seen coming. Do it her way, Curtis said to Wade. Flat. Authoritative. The voice of someone whose professional opinion Wade paid for. She's right. Wade said nothing. He moved back. Lillian unlatched the gate. She went in the way she always went, in the same pace. The same body language, the same low beginning of the rhythm that had been Thunder Ridge's signal for 5 months, now that the world was the same as it had been, and the people around him were the same, and safety was the same. Jackson watched the horse respond to it and felt the specific held-breath quality of a moment balanced on a knife's edge. Thunder Ridge walked toward her. 12 feet. 10. 8. He stopped beside her and put his nose against her shoulder. From the fence, Wade said something under his breath. Jackson didn't catch the words, but he caught the tone of a man revising something. Jackson went in. The horse watched him come. The familiar calculation. The familiar result. He walked to stand on the horse's left side, and Thunder Ridge accepted his hand on the neck the way he had been accepting it for weeks, not just tolerating it. Moving into it slightly, leaning the way horses lean when they have decided contact is good. Curtis, Jackson said, left gate, slow. Curtis came in. This was the moment. This was the thing they had not been able to practice. Could not have practiced a new person. A stranger, entering the space that Thunder Ridge had spent months deciding was safe. And the question of whether all those mornings had built something durable enough to survive contact with the unknown. The horse heard Curtis before he saw him. The ears went to the left. The head came up. Jackson felt the tension move through the neck, under his hand, not panic. Not the old panic, but alertness. The deep animal awareness of something new. Curtis moved slowly. He held his body with the sideways angle of someone who had done this before. And Jackson revised his estimate of the man upward considerably. Lillian started talking. Low rhythmic. The pattern. Thunder Ridge's ears stayed on Curtis. His head stayed up. Curtis stopped. 15 feet away, he just stood and waited. 30 seconds. A minute. The silence in that corral was the most absolute silence Jackson had ever stood in. And everyone outside it felt it too. He could feel the held breath of Henry and Wade at the fence like a physical presence. Thunder Ridge took a step toward Curtis. Jackson did not move. Lillian kept talking. Another step. Curtis remained completely still. His body language making no demands, offering nothing except presence. Just a person standing in a space. Non-threatening. Predictable, available. The stallion reached him, pressed his nose briefly against Curtis's extended hand. Pulled back, looked at him, then turned and walked back to Lillian. The breath that left Jackson's body was the breath of a man who had been holding it for 2 months. Curtis turned around and walked out of the corral. And when he reached the gate and closed it behind him and turned to face Wade, his expression was something that Jackson suspected people did not see on Curtis's face very often. That, Curtis said, is a recovered horse. Wade stared at him. Recovered meaning the trauma is not gone, but it is managed. Meaning the trust is rebuilt to a functional level. Meaning this animal can be handled, ridden, and worked with. by the right person using the right approach. Curtis opened his notebook. I need to see Gates. And then I have questions. He looked at Lillian. For Miss Caldwell. Lillian looked at him. All right, in my 22 years of evaluating horses, Curtis said. And his voice had changed. It had the quality of someone saying something they had decided is true and are not interested in debating. I have never seen a behavioral recovery of this magnitude documented to this level of detail. I want to see those journals, Henry said. From the fence. She has journals? Curtis looked at Henry. Apparently your daughter has been keeping detailed observational records of this horse's recovery for 5 months. Mr. Caldwell. His voice was even and professional and contained something underneath that was not entirely unlike rebuke. It is the most thorough behavioral documentation I have encountered in this territory. Henry did not say anything. He looked at Lillian. Lillian looked at her father and then looked away. Not in anger, but with a particular dignity of someone who has waited a long time for a moment and has decided they are not going to perform emotion when it arrives. They ran the gates. Lillian led Thunder Ridge through his paces walk. Trot, a gentle canter that showed the power still in him. The quality of movement that had made him worth a fortune before the accident, and still did. He was not the horse he had been at 4 years old. Naive and unbroken. He was something else. He was the horse he was now marked by what had happened. Shaped by what had come after, carrying both of those things in the way he moved. Curtis watched and wrote. Wade watched and said nothing. Henry watched from the fence, with an expression that was trying to contain more than it was built to hold. At the end of the demonstration, Curtis walked tight of the fence where Lillian had come, after returning Thunder Ridge to the corral. And he said, the journals. May I? She handed them over without hesitation. All of them. 6 months' worth, the pages swollen with use. The covers worn soft with handling. Curtis opened the first one. Read. Turned pages. His face was completely still and completely attentive in the way of a man reading something that is changing what he knows. After 15 minutes, he closed the journal and looked up. Miss Caldwell, he said, how did you learn this approach? I developed it, she said. From observation. You had no formal training, no mentor. No professional guidance. No, Curtis was quiet for a moment. I want to be direct with you, he said. What you have done here, what you have documented here, is not standard practice. It is not the way trained professionals approach behavioral rehabilitation. In several respects, it is better than the way trained professionals approach it. Because it starts from a different question. Lillian waited. Most rehabilitation asks, what do we need to change in this horse? Curtis said. You asked, what does this horse need to feel safe? That is not a small distinction. He looked at her steadily. This horse is ready for sale. More than ready. But I want Wade to understand clearly that this animal's value is dependent on the continuation of this specific approach. He cannot be passed to a standard handler and expected to maintain this level of functioning. Wade, who had been silent for the past 20 minutes, said, What does that mean practically? It means, Curtis said, that if you purchase this horse, you need to purchase the method with him. He closed the notebook. Which means, ideally, the person. The silence that followed that sentence was the specific silence of a statement that has reorganized the room. Wade looked at Lillian. Curtis looked at Wade. Henry looked at all of them and then looked at Jackson. And the look on Henry's face was the look of a man arriving at an understanding that had been waiting for him for a long time. Miss Caldwell is not part of any sale, Henry said. His voice was quiet and absolutely certain. Everyone looked at him. She is not an asset of this ranch, Henry continued. She is my daughter, and she is not going anywhere with a horse. He paused. And the pause contained something that was costing him. She is going to remain here and do what she's apparently been doing all along, which is run the part of this operation that I was too blind to see she was already running. Lillian turned to look at her father. Henry looked back at his daughter, and the expression on his face was not simple. It was the expression of a man who had failed someone and knew it and was trying to say so in the only language that was available to him in that moment, which was action rather than apology. "Papa," she said, very quietly. "The journals," he said. His voice was rough. "All those mornings. You were out there every morning." "Yes, I knew that," he said. "I told myself it was. I told myself you were." He stopped. "I saw it," he said finally. "I saw what you were doing, and I decided it wasn't the kind of thing worth seeing, and I was wrong. I was wrong about that." Lillian held his gaze. The thing in her expression was complicated and honest, and it did not perform forgiveness, but it did not withhold it either. "I know," she said. Henry nodded. He turned to Wade. "Name your price," he said. "The horse is worth whatever Curtis says he is." Wade and Curtis exchanged a look. The evaluator's look said, "This is your decision." Wade's look said, "It is." "Full asking price," Wade said. "Plus 10% for the documentation." He looked at Lillian. "I've never bought a horse with a behavioral record like that. It's worth something." Lillian looked at Jackson. He looked back at her. And in the look between them was everything that had been building for 7 weeks, the mornings. The journals, the hand on the fence rail, the horse pressing his nose between them. The conversation in the barn 3 days ago, the door that had been opened and could not now be closed. She turned back to Wade. "That's acceptable," she said. The paperwork took an hour. During that hour, Jackson stood outside at the fence with Thunder Ridge, who had no idea what was happening in the house, but knew that the two-legged people who mattered were nearby and that the world felt stable. And the horse stood beside him, at the fence rail, with his head close to Jackson's shoulder. "It's done," Jackson told him. "You did it." The horse exhaled. He was getting very familiar with that sound. When Lillian came out of the house, the deal was closed, and the papers were signed, and the Caldwell Ranch debt was going to be cleared in full by the end of the week. She walked to the fence. She looked at the horse. She put both hands on his face. The big, dark face that had become familiar to her over 5 months of mornings. And she said something to him quietly that was only for him. Thunder Ridge would be transported in 4 days. The new arrangement included a detailed handling protocol that Curtis had insisted Wade sign Lillian's protocol. Pulled directly from the journals, codified and binding. The horse would go to a property with handlers trained in the approach. He would not be passed to someone who would undo what had been built. She had insisted on that before she signed anything. Jackson had heard her insist on it, from the hallway where he was not quite eavesdropping. And he had felt something settle in him that was not surprise, but was still significant. She had protected the horse, even in the moment of letting him go. Of course she had. When Lillian lifted her hands from Thunder Ridge's face and turned around, she found Jackson standing 2 feet behind her. She didn't startle. She had known he was there. "It's done," she said. Yes. She looked at the house, at the mountains, at the corral that was going to be empty in 4 days. "He said something in there," she said. "Wade." He asked Curtis quietly. "He thought I wasn't listening." He asked how a woman alone on a ranch figured out in 5 months what professionals hadn't figured out in 5 years of working with trauma cases. She paused. Curtis said she didn't have anyone telling her what couldn't be done. Jackson said nothing for a moment. Then, "That's exactly right." She looked at him. "You said something to Curtis before the evaluation. I saw you talking to him. What did you tell him?" "I told him the truth," Jackson said. "That this was your work. That I came in the middle of it and built on what you'd laid. That without what you'd spent 4 months doing alone, there was nothing for me to build on." She was very still. "You told him that," she said. "Yes, in front of Wade." "Yes." She looked at him for a long moment. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," he said. "I did it because it's true. And because someone needed to say it where the right people could hear it." He paused. "That's what you wrote in the margin, remember. Someone should know." The expression that moved across her face was not something I could fully name. It was complicated and real, and it contained something that had been waiting to arrive for a long time. "Jackson," she said. "I know," he said. "I know. I told you I wanted to talk about what comes next." You did. I'm still figuring out what I want to say. Take your time, she said. And she said it gently, without the edge she sometimes used when she was protecting herself from something. He took a breath. I came here for a horse, he said. That's the truth. That's all I thought this was. Another job. Another ranch. Another problem I could fix and leave. He looked at her directly. I was wrong about that from about the third morning. She didn't say anything. She waited. I don't know how to do this, he said. I want to be honest about that. I've spent 11 years not doing this. Not allowing this. I got very good at leaving before it was possible to lose anything. He paused. You told me weeks ago that running doesn't work, that you can't outride it. You were right. You were right about that. The way you're right about most things. Not most things, she said quietly. Some things. Most things, he said. He stopped. He had been composing this in his head for 3 days, and it had been more coherent in his head than it was coming out. I don't want to leave, he said. I want to stay. I want to find out what comes after the horse for both of us. I want to be here in the morning and have that mean something. He stopped again. I want to stop outrunning it. I want to put it down somewhere. You said that was the start of it. Deciding to stay somewhere long enough to find out. Lillian looked at him. You remember that, she said. I remember everything you say, he said. That's how I know I'm in trouble. Something broke open in her face. Not dramatically. The way things break open in people who have spent a long time holding things suddenly. Quietly and completely. I'm not going to make it easy for you, she said. I'm not going to make it easy for anyone, ever. I have opinions and I keep journals and I will argue with you when I'm right. And I won't apologize for it. I know, he said. I'm not looking for easy. I don't know what I'm doing either, she said. In case you thought I had this figured out, I've never. She paused. Nobody has ever. She stopped. Restarted. You are the first person who read the journals, she said. All of them. To the end. I know, he said. I know what that means. She looked at him for a long moment in the afternoon light of the ranch yard. This woman who had spent 5 months at a fence alone, because someone needed to, and had never asked for credit, and had refused to be reduced to a category, and had understood things about fear and trust, and the patience required to rebuild both that. Jackson had spent 11 years running from understanding. Stay, she said. It was not a question, it was not a plea. It was the same direct, unguarded simplicity with which she did everything. Yes, he said. Thunder Ridge pushed his nose over the fence rail between them. Both of them looked at the horse, then at each other. And for the first time in front of her, Jackson Cole smiled. A real one, unguarded, unqualified, the full thing without the stopping of it that he had been doing for weeks. Lillian looked at him, smiling, and something in her own face answered it. Good, she said. We have work to do. She turned back to the horse, and Jackson stood beside her, and the afternoon settled around them. And inside the house, Henry Caldwell sat with a signed contract and a clear debt and a heart that was working out what it felt like to have finally done something right. And outside at the fence, 2 people and 1 horse stood in a silence that was not empty at all. That was full of everything that had been building since the morning a cowboy rode into Caldwell Ranch, saying he came for the horse and had absolutely no idea what he was walking toward. 4 days later, Thunder Ridge left for his new home. Lillian stood at the fence and watched the transport pull away. And she was dry-eyed and straight-backed and completely present in the way she was present for everything. And Jackson stood beside her and did not try to fill the space with words. When the transport was out of sight, she said, He's going to be fine. He is, Jackson said. He knows who he is now, she said. He knows how to come back when something frightens him. That doesn't go away. She turned from the fence. She looked at Jackson. Neither does this, she said. He knew she wasn't talking about the horse anymore. No, he said. It doesn't. They walked back toward the ranch together. And the mountains were there in the Wattons, the way they always were. And the work that was ahead of them was real and large and entirely different from the work that brought them to this moment. And neither of them was afraid of it. Or rather, they were both afraid of it. In the way that people are afraid of things that matter enough to be afraid of. But they had both learned from a black stallion who had chosen to trust again against every reason he had not to, that being afraid of something and walking toward it anyway was not weakness. It was the whole point. It was, in fact, the only way home. The first morning after Thunder Ridge left, Jackson woke at 4 and lay in the dark and waited for the feeling to tell him what it was. It wasn't grief exactly. It wasn't loss. It was the specific quiet that settles over a place. When something large has been completed, the silence of a chapter that has closed and the next one that hasn't opened yet. And the strange suspended moment between those two things where you don't quite know who you are without the work that defined you. He got up, dressed, went outside. Lillian was at the fence. He stopped when he saw her. Then he kept walking, because of course she was there. Of course. 5 months of mornings did not simply stop because the horse was gone. The body remembered. The habit of it was deeper than habit. It had become the structure of her days. The architecture of how she moved through time, and you didn't dismantle that in a night just because the thing that built it had driven away in a transport. He came to stand beside her at the empty corral. Neither of them spoke for a while. The corral was just a corral now, fence rails and dirt, and the ghost of a presence that had been enormous enough to leave an absence you could feel. "I keep looking for him," she said finally, "at the near corner. That's where he'd be this time of morning. I know. It's going to do that for a while," she said. Was not a question. It was the statement of someone who understood grief at a structural level, who knew it didn't announce itself or follow a schedule, who knew it appeared in the corner of an empty corral at 5 in the morning and simply had to be stood through. "Yes," he said. "It is." She put her hands in her coat pockets. "Curtis sent a message yesterday afternoon," she said. "The transport arrived safely. Thunder Ridge unloaded without incident." He walked into his new corral and stood at the fence and looked around. She paused. "Curtis said he was calm." "Of course he was," Jackson said. "He knows how to be calm now. He knows it's possible," she said. "That's different from calm. Calm is a state. Knowing it's possible, knowing you can get back to it from the hard places, that's something you carry." She was quiet for a moment. "That's what we actually gave him. Not calm, the knowledge that calm exists, and he can find his way back to it." Jackson looked at her profile in the early dark. She was tired still, the deep tiredness of weeks of sustained effort. Not something a single night solved. But there was something different in her face this morning. Something that had been held tight for months and had finally been allowed to loosen. "What are you thinking?" he asked. She looked at the empty corral. "I'm thinking that I don't know what I do now," she said honestly. "I've spent 5 months entirely focused on one thing. And I know that sounds like it should feel like freedom. The thing is done. The pressure is over. The ranch is saved. But it mostly feels like standing in a room where the furniture's been moved, and you keep walking into the spaces where things used to be." "Yes," he said. "I know that feeling." She looked at him. "You've felt it often." "Every time I left a ranch," he said. "The job ends. The horse is fixed. The money's in my pocket. And I ride out, and there's this emptiness. I told myself it was freedom. I rode through it fast enough that I could keep telling myself that. And now I'm not riding through it," he said simply. "I'm standing in it with you, which is different." She held his gaze. "Is it better?" "Yes," he said, considerably. Something in her face shifted, not softened exactly. Because she was not a woman who softened, but opened. The specific opening of a person allowing something real to arrive. "I talked to my father last night," she said. "After the message from Curtis came." Jackson waited. "He asked me what I wanted to do," she said. "Not what I was going to do. Not what I should do. What I wanted." She said it with the emphasis of someone for whom those 2 words in that order from that person were genuinely new. "I think it was the first time he's asked me that." "What did you tell him?" "I told him I wanted to build something," she said. "Here. On this ranch. A program structured, intentional for horses like Thunder Ridge. Horses that other people have given up on. Horses that aren't broken, that are frightened, that need someone willing to start from understanding instead of control. She paused. I told him I had the documentation. I had the methodology. I had 5 months of evidence that it works. I told him I needed his support, and I needed the East Corral, and I needed him to stop seeing what I do as a distraction from real work. What did he say? He said yes, she said. And in those 2 words was 5 months of waiting for them. He said yes to all of it. He said she stopped. When she started again, her voice was slightly different. The controlled voice with something real moving underneath it. He said he was sorry. He said it plainly. No conditions. No explanation. Just, I'm sorry, Lillian. I saw what you were doing and I chose not to see it, and I'm sorry. Jackson said nothing. Because there was nothing to say that would be more than that moment deserved. I told him it was all right, she said. Is it? She thought about that honestly. It's enough, she said. I don't need it to be all the way all right immediately. I need it to be moving in the right direction. And it is. She looked at the empty corral. He's a man who spent his life doing things a certain way, because that's how they were done. And he raised a daughter who refused to accept that as a reason. And somewhere in there he loves her and has been failing her and is trying to stop. That's enough to work with. Yes, Jackson said. It is. She turned to look at him directly. The full attention. Both eyes, nothing reserved. And you, she said. What are you doing today? What do you need? He said. I need someone who understands horses, she said. I need someone who can evaluate new cases, who knows when a horse is ready to progress and when it needs to wait, who can train other handlers in the approach. She paused. I need someone who isn't going to tell me what can't be done. Then you need me, he said. Yes, she said. I do. And then, with a directness that was entirely hers, I also need the other thing. The thing you said at the barn. The staying. You have that, he said. You've had that since the barn. She looked at him for a moment longer. Then she nodded, the decisive nod, the one she used when she'd made a real decision all the way through. Good, she said. Then let's go talk to my father about the East Corral. They went inside. And the day began. The East Corral conversation with Henry lasted 2 hours. And it was the most honest conversation Jackson had ever watched 2 people have with each other across a table. Lillian laid out her plan with the same precision she brought to her journals, structured, evidence-based, clear about what she knew and honest about what she didn't yet. She talked about the approach, the documentation, the potential to build something that had genuine value, not just for Caldwell Ranch, but for horse owners across the territory who were losing animals they didn't have to lose. Henry listened. Really listened, not the listening of a man waiting to redirect, but the listening of a man who had decided something had changed in him and was determined to honor that change even when it cost him something. When she finished, Henry said, "You'll need more than 2 people. Eventually," she said. "We start small. We learn what works at scale. We document everything the same way I documented Thunder Ridge." Funding, Henry said. The sale covered the debt, but a program like this, Curtis, Jackson said. Both of them looked at him. Curtis knows everyone in this territory and half the breeders in the East. He spent 15 minutes with those journals and called them the most thorough behavioral documentation he'd encountered in his career. He's exactly the kind of connection that turns a local operation into something that reaches further. Henry looked at Jackson steadily. "You're going to stay," he said. "Not a question." "Yes," Jackson said. "And build this." "Yes." Henry was quiet for a moment. He looked at his daughter. He looked at Jackson. He looked at the table between them, where Lillian's journal was open to a page of observations that had turned out to be the beginning of something none of them had planned. "All right," Henry said. "The East Corral is yours. I'll handle the ranch side. You handle the horses." He extended his hand across the table to Lillian first. She shook it, and in the shaking of it was the renegotiation of something fundamental between a father and a daughter who were finally talking to each other like equals. Then Henry extended his hand to Jackson. "I hired you for a horse," he said. "I didn't expect to end up with a partner." "I didn't expect it either," Jackson said. He shook Henry's hand. "Good," Henry said. "We'll work something out on the numbers." He closed the journal carefully. "I want to read these," he said to Lillian. "From the beginning, if that's all right." Lillian looked at her father. Something moved in her face, something old and true, and not fully expressible in any words she could have used. "Yes," she said quietly. "That's all right." They had their first new case within 3 weeks. A letter arrived, word traveled in the territory the way it always did, through the network of people who talked to each other at grain markets and cattle auctions and church socials, from a rancher Chaz named Beaumont. 40 miles east, he had a mare, Chestnut, 6 years old. Had been a reliable working horse for 4 years, and then she'd been caught in a wire fence accident that left her physically healed but behaviorally unreachable. 3 months of standard handling had produced nothing except 2 more injured hands and a horse that now had to be tranquilized to shoe. Beaumont had heard about Thunder Ridge. He had heard specifically about how it was done. He wrote to Lillian by name. Not to Henry, not to Jackson, to Lillian. She read the letter at breakfast and said nothing about it while she ate. Then she set down her fork and said, "I want to go see her before she comes here. I want to see her in her own environment first, understand what she's responding to before we change all the variables." "That's not in the journals," Jackson said. "The Thunder Ridge protocol starts here. Thunder Ridge came to us," she said. "He arrived already removed from the place where the trauma happened. This mare is still there. I want to understand what she's telling us about that environment before we move her." Jackson thought about it. "That's a good instinct." "It's not an instinct," she said. "It's a hypothesis. I could be wrong." She looked at him. "But I won't know if I don't go. When do you want to leave?" "Tomorrow morning," she said. They rode out the next morning, both of them, 40 miles east to Beaumont's ranch. And Lillian spent 3 hours watching the chestnut mare before she said a single word to Beaumont about what she observed. She stood at the fence with her journal open and wrote and watched and wrote again. And Beaumont, a cautious man, a man who had spent money and patience already and was not inclined to give either away, easily watched Lillian watching his horse and kept his mouth shut, which told Jackson something good about him. At the end of 3 hours, Lillian closed the journal. "The wire fence accident happened at the north end of the property," she said to Beaumont. "Near the big elm, am I right?" Beaumont stared at her. "How did you know that?" "She drifts south," Lillian said. "Every time she moves freely, she drifts south. She's mapping her own safety zone, and north is outside it." She paused. "When your handlers have been working with her, they've been starting from the South Corral, which is right, that's her safe zone. But they've been trying to move her north for shoeing, toward the barn, which is north of where she feels safe." She looked at Beaumont. "Move the shoeing operation south, at least to start. Work in her safe zone until she's confident enough to expand it." Beaumont was quiet for a moment. That's a 3-sentence solution to 3 months of failure. "It might not work," she said. "It's a hypothesis, but it costs you nothing except moving the farrier's setup 60 feet. She paused. "And if it works, you document it. Every session, I want to see those records." Beaumont looked at Jackson. "She always like this?" "Yes," Jackson said. "You get used to it." Lillian looked at Jackson sideways. He looked back. And in the space between them was everything that the weeks had built, the specific language of 2 people who had been paying very close attention to each other for long enough that the words were secondary. Beaumont moved the shoeing operation south. The farrier came 3 days later, and the mare stood for it. Not perfectly, not without tension, but stood for it, chose to remain rather than run. Which was the whole thing. That was always the whole thing. Beaumont's letter arrived at Caldwell Ranch 8 days after they'd visited. It was a single page, and it said 2 things. The first was that the mare had been shod successfully 3 times since the visit. The second was that he knew of 4 other ranchers in the area with similar situations, and he'd be telling them, all to write to Lillian Caldwell. She read the letter at the fence, the East Corral fence, which was her fence now, her space, her operation. She read it, and then she folded it carefully and tucked it into the current journal. 4 more, she said. Word travels, Jackson said. We're going to need another corral, she said. Henry already mentioned it, Jackson said. He's been talking to the lumber supplier. She looked at him. He's been planning the expansion, apparently. Without telling me. He was going to tell you, Jackson said. I think he wanted to have the numbers ready first. So it was a real offer rather than a gesture. Something moved through her face, the complicated thing that was still working itself out between her and her father. The long project of rebuilding what had been neglected in a different way than Thunder Ridge, but along similar lines. Not broken, never broke, just unused, unacknowledged, waiting for the right conditions to grow. He's trying, she said. He is, Jackson said, genuinely. She nodded. She looked at the East Corral. She looked at the mountains. She looked at Jax's with those direct dark eyes that had seen everything they looked at clearly and without flinching since the first morning he arrived. I need to ask you something, she said. All right. The night before the inspection, she said. When you came to the barn, you told me you wanted to talk about what comes next. And I said okay, and then the inspection happened. And the sale happened, and everything moved very fast. She paused. We haven't finished that conversation. No, he said. We haven't. I want to finish it, she said. I want to know what you meant. All of it. Not the parts that were about the work. Jackson was quiet for a moment. The morning was around them, and the East Corral was empty, in the way of something waiting to be filled. And he had been carrying the rest of what he meant to say for 2 weeks now. Waiting for the right moment, and there was no right moment. There was only the moment you were in, and the choice you made in it. I meant that I love you, he said. She went very still. I meant that I have been in love with you since approximately day 3, he said. And I spent the next 45 days pretending I wasn't, and doing a worse and worse job of it. And the night before the inspection, I decided I was done pretending, because life is short, and I have already lost enough time to fear. He looked at her directly. I meant that I want to build this with you. The program. Yes, the work, yes. But also everything that isn't the work. The mornings. The arguments I will lose because you're usually right. The journals I want to keep reading. All of it. I want all of it. Lillian stood at the fence in the morning light and looked at him, and the expression on her face was something he had never seen there before, not composed. Not contained. Not the careful professional distance or the precise directness she used as both weapon and shield. Just her, plain and open and entirely without armor. I know, she said. I've known for weeks. He blinked. You've known. I told you, she said, and there was something almost warm in it. Almost the smile she kept close. I notice everything, and you didn't say anything. I was waiting for you to be ready to say it, she said. I didn't want to say it first and have you, she stopped. I didn't want you to feel pushed. You'd been running for 11 years. I didn't want to be another thing you felt the need to outrun. He stared at her. You were protecting me. I was being patient, she said. I'm good at patient. He laughed. It was sudden and real, and it came from somewhere he hadn't accessed in a very long time. Lillian looked at him laughing, and something in her own face broke into that full, unguarded thing he'd seen only once before the day Thunder Ridge chose to trust. I love you too, she said, and she said it the way she said everything that mattered directly. Without apology, as if it were a fact she had established through careful observation, and was now recording in the permanent record. I have for a while. I wasn't going to keep it to myself indefinitely. He stepped toward her. She didn't step back. He put his hand against her face, careful. The way you are careful with things that matter enormously, and she put her hand over his. And they stood at the East Corral fence in the early morning of Caldwell Ranch, and the world continued around them. Ordinary and extraordinary at once, the way the world is when the thing that was supposed to happen finally does. That was the moment Henry Caldwell chose to come around the corner of the barn. He stopped. He took in what he was seeing. He looked at his daughter and the man who had ridden into his ranch 8 weeks ago for a horse and had apparently found something else entirely. Henry Caldwell did something then that surprised all three of them. He turned around and walked back the way he'd come. Quietly, without a word, Lillian looked after him. Jackson looked after him. Then they looked at each other. "He'll need time," she said. "He'll be all right," Jackson said. "Yes," she said. "He will." A pause. "He's been trying, he has." She turned back to the fence. Back to the empty East Corral that was going to have a new horse in it by the end of the week. And after that another, and after that, however many it took to build the thing she had been moving toward since the first morning she stood at a fence because someone needed to. "We should write to Curtis," she said, "about formalizing the methodology. If we're going to teach other handlers, we need a document they can use." "Not today," he said. She looked at him. "Not today?" "Today," he said. "I want to just be here, with you, without the work in front of us for one morning." He looked at her steadily. "Can we do that?" She considered it. He could see her considering it, the genuine deliberation of a woman for whom stillness had never been comfortable, who had built her whole world around usefulness and purpose and the forward motion of getting things done. Then she said yes, and she stayed at the fence. And he stayed beside her, and the morning continued its ordinary business around them. The sounds of the working ranch, the distant mountains, the empty corral filling gradually with light, and they stood in it together without doing anything except being exactly where they were. After a while, Henry came back around the corner of the barn. He walked to the fence on Jackson's other side and stood there, the three of them in a row, looking at the East Corral. "The lumber supplier says 6 weeks for the new corral materials," Henry said. "That's fine," Lillian said. "I also," Henry said, and his voice was careful and deliberate, "wrote to your mother's sister in Cheyenne to let her know what you've built here." He paused. She wrote back. "She wants to visit." Lillian was very still. "She hasn't visited in 8 years," she said. "I know," Henry said. "I should have invited her sooner." Another pause. "I should have done a lot of things sooner. I'm aware of that." The morning sat around the three of them. "Papa," Lillian said, and she said it gently, the way she'd said it in the office during the inspection. The word that meant she was done performing patience and was just speaking directly. "It's enough. You're doing enough. Let's just build the thing." Henry put his hand on the fence rail. He nodded. "The letter from Curtis," Jackson said to Henry. "The one Lillian's going to write today about formalizing the methodology." "Not today," Lillian said. "Tomorrow," Jackson said. He looked at her. She looked at him. The argument was exactly 3 seconds long, and she conceded it with a look that said she was not conceding, but she was going to let this one go. "Tomorrow," she said. Henry looked between them. He said nothing, but something in his face said he understood what he was looking at, and that he was making the choice, consciously, deliberately. The way he was trying to make his choices now, to understand it as something good. Weeks passed. Then months. The East Corral filled. A bay gelding from a ranch near Rawlins, whose owner had lost 3 handlers trying to work with him. A gray mare from a breeder in Carbon County who'd been declared unsaleable. A young stallion, barely 3 years old, that had been mishandled so early in his life that he had no framework for trust at all, which meant they had to build one from the beginning, which was the hardest kind of work. And also, Lillian wrote in her journal, the most important. Every case was documented. Every approach was recorded. Every setback and every gain went into the record with the same precision that had produced 112 days of Thunder Ridge. Curtis came to visit in the 3rd month. He spent 2 days at the ranch, observed 3 sessions with 2 different horses, read Lillian's expanding documentation, and then sat at Henry's kitchen table and said that he wanted to recommend Caldwell Ranch to every breeder and ranch owner in his professional network. "What do you need?" he asked. Formally, "What would make this sustainable?" "A second trained handler," Lillian said immediately. "Someone who can learn the approach and apply it without constant supervision." "We can't be in 2 corrals at once." "I have someone in mind," Curtis said. "Young man in Laramie. Grew up on a ranch, good instincts. didn't fit the standard breaking method because he kept wanting to understand the horses instead of just managing them. He looked at Lillian. "Sounds familiar," she smiled. "The full one." "Send him," she said. The young man arrived the following week. His name was Thomas, and he was 21, and he reminded Jackson of no one so much as a younger version of the person. Jackson had been before Denver earnest and capable, and not yet hardened by the things that harden people. He handed Lillian his references, and she looked at them and handed them back and said, "I don't need those. Tell me what you see when you look at a frightened horse." Thomas thought about it. "Something that was hurt," he said, and then decided the whole world was the thing that hurt it. Lillian looked at Jackson. Jackson looked at her. "You'll do," she said to Thomas. He did. He learned fast, and he was teachable, and he made mistakes and recovered from them, and documented both with the thoroughness Lillian required of everyone who worked in her corrals. By the end of his second month, he was handling cases independently, with Lillian observing rather than directing, and the program had 3 corrals, running simultaneously, and a waiting list. A waiting list. Lillian told Jackson about the waiting list. On a Sunday morning they had established, as the one morning of the week they did not go to the corrals first, that they gave to themselves first, which had been Lillian's suggestion, Asgent, and had surprised him enough that he'd asked her to say it again. She'd said it again. She told him about the waiting list, and he said, "How many?" And she said, 14 horses, and they looked at each other across the kitchen table, and the size of what they had built sat between them, plain and real, and almost too large to hold. "We need more corrals," she said. "We need more land," he said. "Papa has been talking to the Dennison family," she said. "About the parcel to the north. How long has that been happening?" 3 weeks, she said. He wanted to have the numbers ready before he brought it up. She almost smiled. "Apparently it runs in the family." Jackson looked at her across the table. The morning light was on her face, and she had ink on her right hand from writing, and her hair was the same as always, and she was entirely and completely herself in every direction. And he thought about 11 years of riding away from places, and the story he had told him about all of that, and the distance between that story and what he was looking at right now. "Lillian," he said. She looked up from the journal she'd been making a note in. "Marry me," he said. She put down the pen. She looked at him with those direct dark eyes that had seen everything clearly since the first morning. The eyes that had read horses and people, and the spaces between what was said and what was meant with the same precision and the same refusal to be fooled. She looked at him for a long moment. "I've been waiting for you to ask that for 2 months, she said. He blinked. 2 months. "Since November," she said. "I knew it was coming. I could see you working up to it." She picked the pen back up. "Yes," she said, "obviously." "Obviously," he said. "Don't look at me like that," she said. "You knew too." He had known. "Yes," he said. She made a note in the journal. He watched her write and did not ask what she was writing because he understood. At a depth that 11 years of moving had not reached, but 8 months of staying had. That her journals were where she kept the things that were most real to her. That the act of writing them was the act of making things permanent. Of insisting they had happened and mattered and would continue to matter. He was in those journals. He had been for a long time. He thought about the first entry she'd ever written that had stopped him cold. Someone should know. 3 words in the margin of a page about a horse that nobody believed in anymore. 3 words that were really about a woman who had been doing something extraordinary alone. In the cold, before dawn, without recognitions or support or any reason except that it needed doing. Someone knew now. Not just him. Curtis Thomas. The 14 ranchers on the waiting list. Henry. The breeders in the east that Curtis was writing to. The territory, slowly, in the way territories learn things, through the network of people who talk to each other and say, "Have you heard about what they're doing at Caldwell Ranch? About the woman up there who figures out what the horse is actually afraid of. About the horses they've brought back that nobody else could reach." They heard. They kept hearing, and every horse that came through those corrals and left different, not fixed. Never fixed. but changed in the way that was better than fixed. Changed in the way that carries forward was another entry in the record that Lillian Caldwell had been building since the morning she first stood at a fence because someone needed to. Jackson Cole had ridden into Caldwell Ranch 8 months ago with a single clear intention and no complications. He rode in for a horse. He found something that could not be left. Something that had no category in the 11 years of careful leaving he had built his life around. Something that required him to put down what he'd been carrying and stay. Which was the thing he had been most afraid of, and the thing that turned out to be the only way back to himself. He had thought, for 11 years, that staying was the risk. He understood now that it was the opposite. The risk was leaving. The risk was riding through the emptiness fast enough to call it freedom. The risk was spending your whole life being useful to everyone and belonging to no one, and waking up one morning with all your skills intact and nothing underneath them. He had almost done that. He had gotten close enough to the edge of it that he could feel it. And then a letter had arrived from a man named Henry Caldwell about a horse that everyone had given up on. And Jackson had ridden west and had arrived at a fence where a woman was already standing. Already there. Already doing the work. Already 5 months further into the understanding that he would spend the rest of his life learning alongside her. The cowboy came for the horse. The horse led him home. And home, it turned out, was not a place he had ever been before. It was not a place at all. Exactly. It was the specific combination of a woman who argued with him when she was right, and a program that was changing how the territory treated its most frightened animals, and a fence, and a morning, and a journal full of careful handwriting, and the knowledge bone deep. Permanent, the kind that doesn't leave, that he was no longer the kind of man who left. He was the kind of man who stayed. That was not a small thing. That was in fact everything.